Greetings, history lovers. It is I, Dave Smith, your fearless leader, here to talk to you about, you guessed it, the Louisiana Purchase and the Lewis and Clark Expedition. I'm a little shaggy tonight. I apologize. I wasn't going to record tonight, but circumstances have twisted, and I don't have time to go get a shave. Okay, the hair is a little kooky, but hopefully you guys can bear with me. Be like the nutty professor tonight. All right, so what do we want to do in terms of talking about the Louisiana Purchase and Lewis and Clark and etc.? What we want to do is we want to talk about Thomas Jefferson to begin with. I like this picture of Jefferson because he looks like the Dark Lord, you know, Voldemort or Sauron or something like that. But anyway, what I want you to understand about Jefferson is that he was probably the greatest polymath in the history of the United States. Okay, polymath, P-O-L-Y-M-A-T-H. It means a master of many areas of knowledge. Okay. Someone who knew him really well when he was young, in a letter to somebody else, described Jefferson in this way. He said, Thomas Jefferson could calculate an eclipse, survey an estate, tie an artery, plan an edifice, try a case, break a horse, dance a minuet, and play the violin. And this was said of Thomas Jefferson, or written of Thomas Jefferson, before he was 30 years old, before he wrote the Declaration of Independence. So clearly he was a very well-read, very capable guy, right, at a very young age. When Kennedy was president, JFK, he had a party at the White House, a big wing-ding with all the most important and groovy people, right? And when it came time for him as the host to give the toast, he stood up, everybody waited to hear what he was going to say, and what he said was, never has such a collection of talent and intellect been assembled in this room to dine, or to eat, right? And then he paused and he said, since Thomas Jefferson dined here alone. Okay? Obviously, a major tribute to Jefferson, his intellectual abilities. One last little mention of Jefferson and his brain power. When he was an old man, he had a mountain of debt hanging over his head, and the last thing he wanted to do was die with his children having to shoulder the burden of his debt. So there was a variety of ways in which he tried to pay it off. And one of the ways was he wrote a letter to Congress, and he said, from time to time, congressmen are going to need to research certain things, understand things better, and etc. And I think that there should be a Library of Congress. And I would propose to sell to Congress my personal library, which, you know, I'm going to be dead not too far down the line. I don't really need it anymore. And so what do you say? My personal library could become the centerpiece or the seeds, let's say, of this Library of Congress. Now, I'm sure you guys know that in Washington, D.C., we have this great big groovy thing called the Library of Congress, which is where the original Constitution is and the Declaration of Independence and etc. And okay, they said it sounds great. So they cut Jefferson a check for a big pile of money. I'm not too sure how much. Jefferson's library was crated up, you know, and then sort of taken by wagons all the way down to Congress. And okay, Thomas Jefferson's personal library was a little bit more than 27,000 volumes. All right, now, I personally own more books than anyone I know. I've got about 5,000 books in the house. It's a lot. When people come to my house, they go, gee, holy cow, man, you got a lot of books, right? Yeah. So Jefferson had 5 times as many books as I do. But the most extraordinary thing, I think, is this. Jefferson's library was not just alphabetized, but it was alphabetized according to subject. So each subject area, A to Z, A to Z. Jefferson had over 600 subject areas in his library. Okay, now I think if I subdivided all my books in the most anally retentive way possible, I might have 35 to 40 subject areas. Okay, guys, hello? Ask yourself this question. Maybe some of you are big readers. Most of you probably don't read at all. That's what statistics seem to indicate. But, you know, how many things in your life are you going to want to read a book about? 600 different topics? I mean, really? Well, Jefferson, okay, the polymath. So, Jefferson was fascinated with the idea of expanding the territorial holdings of the United States into the West. He wanted to buy this thing called Louisiana from France, or more specifically from the Emperor of France, Napoleon Bonaparte. It was named Louisiana after King Louis, Louis the 14th, right? Back in the day, there was a king, Louis the 14th. He was a big deal. When the French grabbed a hold of this piece of North America, they called it Louisiana. It's not St. Louis, Missouri. Technically, it's St. Louis. You have to say it like a French guy, okay? Because they named it. But okay, we Yankeeized it. We Americanized it. St. Louis, right? All right. Jefferson wanted that chunk of land. Why? Because if you remember from the textbook, Jefferson is crazy out of his mind about farming, about agriculture. He wants more land for more farmers. Period. The end. So he starts negotiating with Napoleon through diplomats, right? In 1801, all the way through 1802. It's not until 1803 that they're actually able to sort this thing out, and the Louisiana Purchase is made for $25 million. Not much money, guys. Tom Cruise makes $25 million for a movie, right? Okay. Now, obviously, it's a little different back then with inflation, but still, what a deal! 25 million clams to just about double the size of the country. It's a tremendous deal. But right from the start, everybody in the country basically is angry about this for one reason or another. Okay, you remember that Jefferson is a Republican, right? That's his party, the Liberal Party. Okay, not only are the conservative Federalists angry about what he's done, his own guys are angry. The Liberals, the Republicans, they're angry about it. Everybody is up in arms about it. Okay, when it comes time for the House of Representatives to vote on whether or not they will ratify this deal, it's only 2 votes that gets it over the hump. I mean, it was almost defeated. Okay, now you might say, what's the problem? How could they possibly have a problem with this? And guys, I don't know what that little square white is in the middle of the map. It's stuck there. I can't get rid of it. I don't know how to fix it. That's the only map I've got for this purpose. So ignore that, okay? Now, why is it that people are aggravated about this? Okay, well, the first issue is the constitutional issue, which is to say, nowhere in the Constitution does it say that the executive branch of government, the president, is allowed to double the size of the country just because he wants to, spending 25 million taxpayers' dollars just because he wants to. Who controls the money? Congress controls the money, the legislative branch. But Jefferson has basically written a check in their name and given it to Napoleon to cash. People are worked up about this. And a lot of people are saying, this guy's a hypocrite, this Jefferson. You got to be kidding me. Isn't he a strict constructionist? Okay, now you may remember this from the textbook. Back when Alexander Hamilton proposed to create the Bank of the United States, Jefferson and Madison and the liberals in general were opposed to it. And they were saying, nowhere in the Constitution does it say that any branch of the government can create a bank this big, this powerful. Well, this is when the original argument came into play about strictly interpreting the Constitution or loosely interpreting the Constitution. Okay? Strict constructionists, like Jefferson, argued that the powers of the federal government are exactly what is written down here, and nothing else. In which case, he shouldn't have been able to make the Louisiana Purchase, right? Hang on. Loose constructionists, like Hamilton, okay, said the powers of the federal government are whatever is written down here and whatever the Constitution does not specifically deny to the federal government, which means that the federal government can have a lot more power, right? Okay, well, again, Jefferson was famously strict, but now he's all loose. Right? Like, what's going on? Well, the bottom line is Jefferson doesn't care about loose, strict, or attacks of being a hypocrite. All he cares about is getting all that land to create more farms and more farmers and more liberty and a better future for the United States. What ends up happening, actually, is that Madison, who is the Secretary of State for Jefferson, Madison jumps into the breach. You may recall that Madison is the father of the Constitution. He wrote the original document. He's the guy. He's the ultimate source on the Constitution. Madison says there's nothing unconstitutional going on here at all. It is the president, or the executive branch's power or right to negotiate treaties with foreign governments. What we have done is we have negotiated a treaty with the government of France to expand the boundaries of the United States. You know, this is a little iffy in terms of logic, all right? But whatever. The bottom line is the argument went on over time. Jefferson's people, meaning the Republican Party, the liberals, they're in control of Congress, they became a little bit more friendly to the idea. They don't want to alienate their president. They don't want to give the other party, the Federalists, a lot of ammunition. So they get a little more chilled out with it, okay? And ultimately, ultimately the Senate approved the treaty with France to purchase Louisiana by a vote of 24-7. Okay, so even a number of Federalists ultimately jumped over the fence and voted in favor of Louisiana Purchase. Okay, now I want to make a couple of other points about why people were so angry about this, or other groups that were angry. Okay, first of all, the Federalists were angry in general, just in general. Okay, because they looked at this and they said, okay, there's going to be a whole bunch more states carved out of this West out here. There's going to be this big thing and this big thing, and then here comes Louisiana, another, and then they'll make a big one here and another big one here. There's going to be all these giant states out here. Okay, they don't know the boundaries yet, but they can see it. As the country moved west, states got bigger, right? I mean, look at Rhode Island, for God's sakes. It's like a carbuncle hanging off the big toe of the country. Nothing. Massachusetts, nothing. Okay, the Federalists were very powerful along the coasts and in the big cities, and especially in New England. Okay, and they resented the fact that ultimately, decades away, these states out west, they believed, would be filled up with people, which would end up diminishing the political power of the eastern states and maybe the Federalist Party. Okay? New Englanders, now remember where New England is, guys, right up here, okay? It's just exactly this. Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire, and then Maine in a little while. New Englanders were particularly aggravated about the Louisiana Purchase. They were going, we didn't vote for that rat bastard Jefferson, and we knew it was the right thing to do. This guy has screwed us. Okay, so what are they upset about? Thing one, this loss of political power. Okay, guys, think about this. Remember the original 13 colonies here? War for Independence, early days of the United States and all that, wrote the Constitution. Okay, 13 colonies. Yes, Georgia and the Carolinas and Virginia and just about everybody were bigger than most of these, New England states. Like, let's look at Massachusetts, okay? Just about everybody's bigger than Massachusetts except for Rhode Island and Connecticut and Maryland. Okay. But there were only 13 colonies or 13 states then when they hammered out the Constitution and they came up with the Bicameral Legislature. Every state gets 2 senators. States get representatives based on their population. Small states, big states. Hopefully you remember this. These guys weren't too upset to be small when there was only 13 states to sort of sort things out. But now they can see that by the 1830s or 40s or 50s, there's going to be all these other gigantic states out here, okay? And all of their representatives and the cumulative power of all of their senators, okay, is ultimately going to overwhelm the power of Massachusetts or Connecticut or New England collectively. In other words, New England and Massachusetts in particular, they remember the days when they were pretty damn influential and pretty damn important, and they can see the days further down the line where they're going to be nothing. That's the way they see it. So they don't like the Louisiana Purchase. No how. Forget about it. Okay, now, what happens next? Well, I told you that Thomas Jefferson is basically like the world's most curious guy, or certainly America's most curious guy. So what does Thomas Jefferson want to do when he looks at this great big old piece of real estate out here that's just got essentially a gigantic question mark on top of it? Like, what the hell's out here? What do we know about this Louisiana out here anyway? Anything? Do we know anything about it? Americans have sailed up the Mississippi River some, and then there's rivers that go west, like the Missouri and the Arkansas and the Red River and the Brazos. Okay, but forget about most, but Americans have only sailed, or not sailed actually, up these rivers. They're using canoes. They've only gone a little ways out on these rivers. In other words, from here forward, it's who the hell knows what's out there. Okay, and since Jefferson wants to know about everything on the planet, he decides to put together something that he calls the Corps of Discovery. C-O-R-P-S, like Marine Corps, short for corporation. The Corporation of Discovery, the Group of Discovery. Okay, the Corps of Discovery. And he puts in charge of it these two characters, Meriwether Lewis and William Clark. Okay, now, I just want to give you a little piece of advice, guys, you know, for your future life, when you grow up, you get married, you have kids and whatever. William Clark, you know, William Clark, a good macho name, right? I mean, Bill Clark, it's not, you know, now batting first baseman for the New York Yankees, Bill Clark, right? It's a good, like, all-American guy's name. Do not, under any circumstances, name your boy Meriwether, okay? Because let me tell you, he's going to get his ass kicked up one side of the playground and down the other. Who in their right mind names a guy Meriwether? Hey, there's Meriwether. Hey, come here, dummy. Right? Terrible. Meriwether. The worst, okay? But both of these guys were excellent as co-captains of this expedition that Jefferson wants to send out, because they're both very brainy guys. They've got some scientific training. They're like junior versions of Jefferson in a way, okay? Clark is a little bit more of the macho, let's say. He's a little bit more the alpha male kind of guy. Lewis is a little bit more the reserved, sort of super brainiac kind of guy. But they're both strong men. They're both intelligent men. They're both capable men. And these guys are going to be in charge of this great expedition. So Jefferson tells them, look, there's three things, really, that I want you to do in particular. Okay, so let's talk about the big plan. They say, right, Chief. Hang on a minute. I need a Ricola, guys. A little dry throat. Okay, so he says, first thing, I want you to discover if there is a waterway, a river, between the Mississippi River and the Pacific Ocean. Okay? In other words, can you sail from this part of the world over here, past New Orleans, up the Mississippi, and out some river somewhere in here, and get to the Pacific? Is there a way to do that? Okay, now, okay, they say, right, Chief, great, we got it. We'll look for that waterway. Here's the thing. European explorers were looking for what they called the Northwest Passage. Northwest Passage, okay? They've been looking for this for hundreds of years. They just believed that this gigantic Western Hemisphere of land could not be continuous from top to bottom. They felt that there had to be a way to get through from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Okay? And they've been looking for it since the 1500s, all right? Now, is there a Northwest Passage? There is, right? At a certain time of the year, when there's not as much ice, you can sail from the North Atlantic through Baffin Bay and like so, the Beaufort Sea, and all the way to the Bering Sea. Now here you are, here's Alaska, here's Russia, here's Sarah Palin's house right here, right? And down this way is the United States, Canada's here. Yet there is a Northwest Passage, and during certain months of the year, ships do sail through it. But during Jefferson's day, they hadn't discovered this yet. This was unknown. And a lot of Americans believe that somewhere in here, there was going to be a way. The Mississippi is one of the biggest rivers in the world, a mile wide most of the way up and down. And they felt like, man, from that thing, one of those other big rivers, the Missouri, the Arkansas, the Brazos, the Trinity, the Red River, there's got to be a way. Well, there wasn't a way. But they thought there was. And so Jefferson said, find that for me. And they said, right, okay. Something that's interesting to take note of. You know, the Spanish Empire at one time controlled the biggest piece of real estate in the Americas, right? Mexico, up here, up this way, all of the islands of the Caribbean, including Cuba, right? Guatemala, Belize, I'm giving you the modern names, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Panama, most of South America except for Brazil. And they also had the Philippine Islands way west across the Pacific. So Spain is way east across the Atlantic. They wanted to find a waterway through the Americas so that they could more easily connect Spain with the American colonies, with the Philippines, and back again, so they could, so they could go through there, right? They were the first ones to have the idea that a canal should be dug from this part of the world's waters to the Pacific Ocean, so they wanted to make a shortcut, a man-made shortcut. But you may also know that the Spanish Empire went bankrupt at a certain point and lost all of its power. to this day. And that was because they made a lot of really poor decisions. And one of their poorest decisions was this. They were going to dig a canal from here down through to here, through what is called the Isthmus of Tehuantepec. Okay, now look at that, guys. It's a long freaking way through mountains and jungle and Mayan Indians and just gnarly. Okay, why didn't they think of doing it here, where Lake Panama already gave them a lot of water in the middle? I mean, isn't this the place where you build something that you might call the Panama Canal? That's right, we did that. Okay, but that didn't occur to them. I don't know why. They have the same map that you're working. They looked at this map and they said, "Here, que bueno," right? No, not que bueno. Well, anyway, that's Spain. We're talking about American history, right? So let's continue. Okay, so Jefferson says, thing one, waterway to the Pacific, right? Thing two, I want you to tell me about the human and the natural resources of the West. Here's a painting, anonymous, I don't know who did it. Here's Lewis and Clark meeting the Indians, some Indian group. They met a lot of Indian groups, a lot of peoples out there, right? Jefferson wanted to know about these people. What are they like? How numerous are they? Are they warlike or peaceful? Will they want to trade with us, or are they going to be a big pain in our ass? Right? Tell me about the human beings out there. Bring me back as much information as you possibly can. There's never going to be enough. Okay? And in addition, what are the natural resources of the West? Which in a way is also like asking, what do the Indians have to trade with us? Okay? In other words, is there gold out there? Silver? Precious minerals? Subsoil wealth? Stuff you can dig up out of the ground. That's number one thing that would be great, right? But if not that, what kind of trees are out there? A bunch of boring elms and cedars and pine trees and fir trees and maple trees. We've got more of those than we know what to do with. But maybe there's going to be a lot of oak trees out there. Oak trees are the greatest trees, guys, to build things like seagoing ships from, because it was the strongest wood in the world, okay, in terms of just durability. It doesn't bend, but it's really hard to break, okay? So oak trees were incredibly valuable, all right? And there are not a lot of them. So maybe oak trees everywhere you can see, what's the water like? The water, we know that it's drier out in the West. That's known, but how dry? How are we going to farm? What can we farm? What kind of soil is it? The composition of the soil? All this. Jefferson wants to know about the natural resources of the West. So they said, check, right, that's number two. What about three? So Jefferson says, okay, look, it might be kind of tough. I don't know, but dead, alive, whatever. If you can, I would really love it if you could bring me back a dinosaur. And they said, okay, cool. Dinosaur, number three. All right, we got to go. And off they go. Now, I assume at least some of you went like, well, what? I thought you said this Jefferson was smart. Dinosaurs. Dinosaurs have been gone from the earth for 70 million years. What are you talking about? Dinosaurs? What is it? Yeah, dinosaurs. He wanted a dinosaur. Okay, so let's talk about this. Maybe you guys know that paleontology is the study of dinosaur bones, dinosaur fossils, okay? The dinosauric past of planet Earth, paleontology. That science was invented in Jefferson's lifetime, okay? In the 1850s for the first time, or 1750s, 1750s, for the first time in the history of the world, in Berlin, in Paris, and in London, 3 places in Europe, scientists figured out how to stick a bunch of these bones together and stand them up, hooked up with metal. So for the first time, well, ever, okay, because there were no human beings when dinosaurs roamed the earth, human beings were able to look and go, oh, thunder lizards. Yeah, dinosaur. That's what that means, thunder lizard. Okay. Jefferson had been to these museums. He'd been to Paris. Okay, he'd seen the dinosaur skeletons. He was hugely excited about it, like anybody was, right? Like we are. You go and you look at him, you go, oh, it's the bitchinest thing ever, right? Yeah, okay. But here's the thing. Jefferson believed what every educated man of this period in history believed, which is to say, there are still dinosaurs roaming the earth. They're just not in Europe or on the east coast of America, but they're out there somewhere. We're just not entirely sure where. Now, why do they believe this? Okay, first off, there are other parts of the world that are not Europe, right, where there are great big creatures, like Africa, okay? In Jefferson's lifetime, they knew about giraffes, crocodiles, gorillas, okay? They knew about water buffaloes, rhinoceri, and lions. That's Africa. Elephants, for God's sakes. Kind of like dinosaurs. Big kind of teeth, giant size. Okay. In the Americas, north and south, there were grizzly bears, mountain lions, although, there we go, alligators, anacondas, the bison, mistakenly called the buffalo, pardon me. And relative to humans, these things were big, okay? I mean, check that out, right? Check this out. I'm not showing you guys anything you haven't seen before in some way or another, okay? These were big animals relative to human beings. Don't even ask about the dude with the living room there, but whatever. Okay, now, remember that most Americans and most well-educated Americans of Jefferson's day are of English descent, and the wealthier and more bigger shots among them, you know, they visited England, whatever, they remember England, they know England, they still have relatives in England. Their biggest frames of reference about just the world in general are where they live, which is America, and England, and then Europe to an extent, right? So, what are the biggest creatures to be found in England at this time in history? Well, they have cats too, but they're not exactly lions. And they got snakes, garter snakes, little piddling, no poisonous snakes, nothing big at all. Okay, this is the closest thing they've got to alligators and crocodiles. And this is the closest thing they've got to a bison, okay, or a water buffalo, cows. You know, I mean, they're big, but nobody's exactly scared of them, right? Okay, they used to have bears in England, but they'd already been exterminated, okay? They were black bears, about 5 feet high, not even as tall as I am. They still have bears in England. Paddington Bear, Winnie the Pooh, okay? You get the idea here? There were no great big giant creatures in Europe anymore in the late 1700s, 1800s, except for horses, cows, okay? But in Africa, in the Americas, and other parts of the world, there were great big creatures. And so, if there are those great big creatures, maybe there can be some other ones. So they believed that there were dinosaurs out there somewhere, for God's sakes, or in the middle of South America, or in the middle of Africa, where no Europeans had explored yet, out in the middle of Eurasia. But this is where Jefferson's hoping for a dinosaur catch, right? So, okay, waterway to the Pacific, human and natural resources, dinosaurs. So, here is what Lewis and Clark do. It takes them 2.5 years, right? What they do is they sail with their guys from Washington off like this, around the bend, whoops, to New Orleans, and then up the Mississippi River to St. Louis, and then they transfer all of their stuff into canoes, and they start canoeing their way up the Missouri River. The Missouri was the biggest, widest, strongest current river out of all these rivers that went west, so this is the one that they felt was the most likely to be a waterway to the Pacific, okay? They went out like this and around and this, okay, and they got to the mouth of the Columbia River Valley in what is now Washington, right, or Oregon, pardon me, okay, and then they went back after the winter. They broke up into 2 parties, they got lost, they went back down, right, okay, and then the same thing back around the bend, home. Okay, now, how long was this supposed to take them? 6 months out, 6 months back, a year. How long did it take them? 2.5 years. Okay, instead of 12 months, it took 30 months. When they were 3 months late, there are letters that still survive where Jefferson is writing to an intellectual pal or somebody, and he's saying, I fear that the Corps of Discovery has, you know, met its untimely demise. I fear that Lewis and Clark have died. They've been devoured by dinosaurs. Indians killed them or something. In other words, when they're 3 months late, no word, Jefferson kind of went, oh, that's terrible, and, well, all right, on to the next task or whatever. But then they show up, right? They get back. And when they come back, they've got 4,000 pounds of stuff with them, okay? 4,000 pounds of stuff. It was like 3 canoes piled with stuff, all bungee corded, roped down with, you know, like things. Okay, they get back. Jefferson can't believe it. He takes a week off of work. For the first time in history, a president took some time off. Jefferson told his people, staff, cabinet, I'm taking a week off. I'm not here unless, you know, war starts, okay? What he did, Every morning, promptly at 8 o'clock, he would meet in the living room of the executive mansion. It wasn't called the White House yet, with Lewis and Clark. They had all the stuff piled up in there. They had both kept journals. Every day they wrote everything that happened from their perspective. They drew pictures of everything. They took leaves and flowers and pressed them between the pages of the journals. They collected the skeletons and the furs and the claws and the teeth of animals, birds, everything, Indian artifacts, fossils. I mean, guys, you name it, okay? And so what they did for a week is they took Jefferson day by day, week by week, through the trip. They read to him from the journals. They showed him. Then they pulled out this, and Jefferson, he's got his magnifying. But let me see that one. Oh, what is it? Oh, let's open that up, right? He writes this letter to a friend afterward. He said, it was like the greatest Christmas morning of any boy's life, and it went on for 7 glorious days, right? It's just like opening gift after gift after gift, okay? Now, here are some images to give you a sense of, what Lewis and Clark saw, kind of. I mean, you're thinking, I know what the Western United States looks like, but bear with me for a minute. This is by the godlike N.C. Wyeth, great illustrator from the early 20th century. Sacagawea leads them west. Unknown artists here, just giving you guys the flavor of people trying to conjure up the idea of what this whole experience was like, right? But more important are these journals. Okay, these are reproductions of pages from the journal, or not reproductions, but photographs, pardon me, of the pages, maps, okay, from Lewis and Clark's journals. Illustrations here, right? They would write about the whatever and then put a drawing of it and write around it, a certain kind of duck, a certain kind of, leaf from a tree or branch from a tree. An Indian canoe with carvings on either end, okay? The condor, that's what that is, and so on and so forth, right? So Jefferson was crazy about this stuff, right? Loved it. Now, they gave Jefferson a lot of things to think about, but the fact of their return was like the biggest news of the age. I mean, it was unbelievable, okay? It was not just unbelievable to Americans, but it was unbelievable to Europeans when they heard about this news of this incredible journey into the unknown by these guys. And they only lost one guy. Only one guy died on the whole expedition. It was because of a freak accident. There was a flash flood. They all got up out of the way, but then the bank broke under this guy's feet. He fell backwards and was swept away by the water. It's incredible that they got through this whole thing. And they only lost one guy, and it was on accident, right? But anyway, everybody's totally out of their mind, okay, about the Lewis and Clark expedition. And literally within a couple of months, there are books being published. The true story of the Lewis and Clark expedition, Journey West, Golden Trails to the land of the setting sun, and blah, blah, blah. Most of them are total fabrications. Guys just taking advantage of this and like fabricating a story and getting it published. Okay, but ultimately, the real version of the Lewis and Clark expedition gets out there. And the bottom line is that within a number of years, every American has either read some version of the Lewis and Clark expedition story, or they've talked about it extensively to people. Everybody knew about this. Maps were shown in newspapers, okay? And slowly but surely what's happening is that Americans start getting even more fascinated than they ever were with the idea of the West. They were always fascinated, over what was over the Appalachian Mountains, and then what was beyond the Mississippi River, and always fascinated with the way west, the trail west, the mystery of the West, okay? Others start going west. Painters like George Catlin going out and painting these like legendary images, okay, of different Plains Indian tribes. Incredible stuff, okay? And then after him come other painters. He kind of blazes the trail for painters, and other painters go. Okay, look at that big stack of staghorns, incredible, right? And then other artists went out, they're painting, they're drawing, they're capturing the West, right? And then they're going back east, and more Americans see more and more pictures like this. When photography comes around in the 1840s, you start getting photographs, okay, of the West. Here's an Indian encampment with all the teepees and their livestock and everything, right? A couple of chiefs, I don't know these guys' names, I'm just, a quick glance here at this, right? Now, what is it that's so important about this? Because people just start getting incredibly excited about the potential, the promise, the possibilities, that's a lot of P's, right, of the West. what it could be, what a man might make of himself out there, what it could be turned into. And year after year, decade after decade, more and more and more Americans are going to get more and more fascinated with the West. When did Lewis and Clark get back? 1806. Only 40 years later, guys, there's going to be a war starting in 1846 called the Mexican-American War. The United States started that war with Mexico. Why? Because we wanted California. That's why. We wanted it. After 40 years, our lust for more west had become so huge that we started a war to rip off California from Mexico. Now, we beat Mexico so badly that we also ripped off Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, Colorado, part of Wyoming, part of Kansas, part of Oklahoma, part of Texas, and then California. 9 states completely or partial. Okay. 40 years it took for us to get that fired up. But this is the beginning, guys. The story of Lewis and Clark and their great adventure is the beginning of our enchantment with the distant West. Okay? We're almost done here. 2 years later, Jefferson attempted to buy Florida from Spain. It backfired on him. It didn't work out. This is a great political cartoon where you see Jefferson here as a prairie dog vomiting up piles of gold because he's being stung by Napoleon the Hornet. Okay, it's like sting. He's barfing up all this gold. And then here's this Spanish diplomat dancing around and sort of like making fun of him, like, ah ha ha. I can't read this. I've never found out exactly what the translation says there. But basically making fun of Jefferson for having sort of dropped the ball in terms of trying to buy Florida from Spain. Now, 7 years after that, in 1812, the War of 1812 was going to begin, and by the time that war's over in 1815, we're going to have acquired Florida as a result of the treaty process. So we end up getting it not too far down the line anyway, right? But okay. Manifest Destiny starts up, right? That intoxication with the West, that fascination with the West. Here's John Lutz's legendary painting of 1861, Westward, the course of empire takes its way, right? All these kind of Americans in their Conestoga wagons or walking or on horseback or whatever, heading off into the West, right? The intoxication with the West. Blazing the trails for those big wagon trains of pioneers, okay? Another great N.C. Wyeth painting that doesn't have a title as far as I know, but at any rate. So, okay. The Louisiana Purchase, the Lewis and Clark expedition, the beginning of the American infatuation with all the prospects that are west on the map. We'll get into this more in the textbook, and I may be able to do a video lecture on it sometime soon here. We'll see. But okay. Thanks for being here, guys. I'll talk to you soon.